Hello to all my friends out there in cyberspace and the real world, which is also at the end of the tunnel, at the end of cyberspace. Welcome back to 15-Minute Free Thinking with me, your host, as usual, Carpo. Today's topic, well, let's just say it's difficult to really nail down. I originally had a good podcast planned reminiscing about how the 80s were a fun generation and how the music was hopeful and exciting and goofy, and how music has changed, but how people and society in general has changed, while acknowledging that we all get older and see things differently, but at the same time the tech revolution has changed everything. And I got about 5 minutes into the podcast and got interrupted by the dog barking, so I'm starting over, but it's better because I'm going to consolidate this a lot quicker. This podcast was going to be about positivity. This podcast was going to be about becoming a better person, about really creating what you want in life. I haven't been making as many podcasts. I love making podcasts, but I've been sidetracked by making guitars. I got into luthier work and I'm just obsessed with it. And it's great. I have a new obsession, a new passion, a new hobby, but also a new business, I hope. And I need it because I need to do something to start another business. And it's important to me that I keep focused and I keep my positivity going in my life. And so I had this thought, how much do we worry about other things that are going on in the world? How selfish should we really be about, hey, me and mine are fine. My family's doing okay. I'm doing okay. That's all that matters to me. Fuck the world, right? Well, it's very complicated. I'm going to get into that. I wanted to say this is available for video and audio version. And I don't always do that with podcasts. For those who are watching it on YouTube, I don't always do this because I talk about stuff on these podcasts that I can't talk about on YouTube. So if that happens, this video will probably get deleted, but I think this is pretty fair game because it's discussing topics that are current, relevant, and important. And you can find the podcast on any other platform if you prefer to just download it and listen to it for free. All of my stuff's for free, but I do accept donations on Patreon. For all my patrons, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you. It means a lot. I do this because I love it, though. And the reason I haven't, as I said, been making as many is because I've been doing a lot more woodwork, and that's been something I've been into. And I was a carpenter for, a decade and a half. I on and off had my own business for a while, doing finished carpentry, and I built cabinets and kitchens. So I kind of understand joinery and basic work, but this is a whole new thing, a new world altogether. Being busy and being positive and enjoying your life and loving your family, that's all that matters. But we make a bigger deal out of society because we live in an era where you are immersed and inundated with every fucking angle, from every angle, with bad news, and there's always something bad going on. And when I was listening to music last night, I was listening to Bruce Hornsby in The Range, the song The Way It Is, and it's talking about racism, basically, or laughing at a homeless person when you're walking by, and these basic things that people do that's like, why? And that's basically the premise of of the song. Why are you doing that? But that's just the way it is, accepting reality for what it is. And we've kind of lost touch with that as well. But at any rate, there were a lot of different songs from the 80s that it made me think, why was it so much better? Why do I like the music better? Is it really just because I'm getting older? Well, that's part of it. But it meant something. The heavy metal bands were singing about like social justice and stopping wars, like Rust in Peace by Megadeth. Talking about, stopping nuclear war, because we were right at the tail end of the Cold War. And so 20 years later, here we are, full circle again, another nuclear fear, and everyone's talking about nukes. And it's just, how much should you give a shit? Really? How much should you care about what's going on in the world? I've always cared because I can't help but care. I care about everything that's going on in the Middle East. I care for the people who live in war-torn countries in the Middle East that don't really have internet or, a lot of, let's just say they don't have a lot of utilities. And so they're kind of left in the dark and nobody pays attention. And if it's not covered by the journalists, nobody knows what happened there. And people who are living peaceful lives. I had somebody make the argument, what's going on in Ukraine? Well, it's different because they're civilized. Well, I've heard that somewhere before. What do you think civilized is? You know, I remember when the war in Iraq started, and I had a friend who said, man, I honestly didn't even know they had like paved roads there before the war started. We see things through a very fucked up lens in our lives because we're young at one point and we have to learn things. And I've believed some pretty dumb shit in my life. I've always leaned left, but, you know, I've never gone so far left that I really just think we should give up all our rights and just follow what we're told to do, which seems to be what a lot of people want to do today. Even in this day and age, we still have young men going off to fight wars that they have no idea what they're there for. And in many countries, of course, you're forced to enlist. You have no choice. But the reason why what's going on in Ukraine is a big deal to a lot of people is obviously because there are white people in the West. And that's, you know, well, they're Western type in people's minds, right? And people have all these excuses. Well, they want to join NATO and they shouldn't do that. Or, well, what else would you do? Putin has a right to defend himself. Pff, poppycock. The guy's got more nuclear weapons than any country, including the U.S. He is well prepared to defend himself. He doesn't have to worry about an invasion ever on his country. And what's going on over there is a fucking travesty. And because it's covered, not just by journalists, even the press is getting bombed, of course, and shot at. I mean, you can't really escape that when there's an invasion, but that's always the case in war zones. But in this case, every civilian can record and share because it's a freer society than a lot of places. And because of a free society, it allows people to communicate freely. And I don't think Russia expected people to take up arms and defend their own land, but that's the delusion that leaders have. That we're there to liberate people from their leadership. The truth is, if somebody invaded my country, hey, I don't care much for the leadership I have, but I don't want you imposing your system on our country. I'm very happy, thank you, we'll fix it ourselves kind of attitude. In other words, if somebody wants the power to take over another country in the year 2022, then, you know, that's a problem. I mean, yes, the U.S. has done it, but that's not an excuse either. We do have problems to deal with now. Now, look, all my life I've criticized the U.S. government for our invasions in all the various places we've gone. My father was in Vietnam. He died when I was about 15 from a carcinoma type of lung cancer, which was caused by irritants or pollution sometime in his life, which... well, he grew up in Chicago, but he went to Vietnam. There was Agent Orange. A lot of soldiers died from this. He died right when the year they started actually being allowed to claim compensation and lawsuits for it. Didn't know about that for decades afterwards. But the point being that, you know, so many men died in Vietnam for nothing. And that was one of the earliest wars where we realized that guerrilla tactics will always beat out somebody who's trying to invade with a systematic approach. In the end, if you don't win the hearts of the people, then you can't win the war. As they say, you can win a battle, but you can't win the war. You can't win the war unless you win the people over. And from what I've seen going on in Ukraine with the shelling and the amount of citizens who have been killed, and I've seen civilians running while being filmed, while shells start hitting around them, being shot at. It's not something you can really just say, oh, it's all fake news. It's all fake news. This shit's really happening, and it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate when anyone gets shot at or dies. And when you see someone holding their child and running for their life, you know, and 1.5 million people migrating across the border in a week, this is a huge shift in global politics. The U.S. has lost its reign almost as superpower, not to Russia though, but to China. And that should be scarier because China supports Russia. Between those two superpowers, they know that they could take us down in an instant. But for everyone out there, I'm not trying to worry anyone or make this negative. This will get to the positivity, I promise. There is hope because all of these things eventually come to an end one way or another. How much we have to care as individuals is up to us and how much we want to affect our own mentality. Perhaps we have loved ones over there or we live there, and that's different. But, you know, when wars are happening elsewhere, you should care, but you shouldn't worry. And I think this is a major thing that people need, a hurdle people need to overcome, is their consistent need to worry about everything that's going on. This is what created kind of, well, there's a good and bad. The whole social justice warrior phenomenon, for example. Sometimes that can have benefits. Other times it could just be people attacking someone for something they said. Or the whole Joe Rogan bullshit, you know. Let's censor someone because we don't want to hear things. The reason, and I want to make this point clear, the reason why so many of us in the US are pushing back so hard against, you know, censorship of any type. A lot of people don't understand this, and a lot of my liberal friends don't understand this. Like, well, why wouldn't you want to censor people like Alex Jones or people who are spreading falsity and lies? 5 years ago, I believed that Alex Jones probably should just get kicked off the platforms. I've since changed my mind because I've realized how bad censorship can get and for what reasons. I think everyone should be able to be heard because otherwise you don't know what they're thinking or what's really going on. If people are too dumb to sort through information to see if it's misinformation or unable to, that's not going to change because you kick them off one platform. There's always somewhere else to go. And that's changing. And that's one of the most difficult things. Russia has blocked Facebook and Twitter right now for their users, so their people can't even see what's really going on. The ability for a government to control any part of the internet is another thing Americans are fighting against. So, like I said, the reason why so many people are pushing against the free speech thing or censorship isn't just because of those particular issues. We know people are hateful and they're shitbags, but it's a slippery slope when you start removing any rights, because if you look at any communist country, that's exactly their playbook. The number one thing, you know, censor information. That has always been the way to gain control over a population. And in the US, we still have power as the people. And we should really cherish that and embrace it and stop fighting amongst ourselves and realize how easily we could get fucked over in a night by not nuclear weapons, not by a land invasion, but by somebody on a computer terminal flipping a couple switches or activating a dormant bug, a virus sitting in a computer somewhere in a nuclear facility. These have been shown to exist. People have found them on our power grid programs. They've found these codes that they don't know where they came from. And some of them have been shut down at times. I mean, we've made it very clear that cyber threats are probably the number one fear we should have right now, if anything. But that's all that aside. Nuclear weapons, cyber threats, and I could go into the sun and solar flares, which would just make all of that pretty moot and pointless. Something always happens, but I feel like we're really not growing up fast enough. As I said, when I was growing up, why the 80s were fun? There weren't any wars going on. The tail end of the Cold War, whatever. And then Iraq happened. And Desert Storm, you know, and then it happened again. You know, we've invaded 10 years apart. Always got to have a war. You've got these companies like Raytheon and, you know, I could just, there's a whole list of them making auto parts, aircraft parts, tank parts, missiles, explosives, landmines, a horrific array of killing tools. And because war is such a good profit, then those manufacturers will just continue to make them because somebody else will. You can't get away from it. It is the world we live in. So we need to change minds, not militaries. Military is going to be there, and they have more power than most governments a lot of the time. In our country, there are so many black ops projects that the, you know, Congress, president, they have no clue what's going on behind closed doors. These things run on their own. They're automated by people who, let's just say, their interest is making a lot of money. It's the reason the CIA imported a majority, probably, of the cocaine in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. It was proven that they were doing it. They've been smuggling in drugs on huge, you know, airplanes, boats. It's not like they're going to get searched. So, of course, you know, anybody with a any interest in making some money would be the smugglers. But that's another subject altogether. The point being that governments are crooked, militaries are crooked. Any organization that gets too large will find a way to become crooked. And this is something I've seen all the time. And I can't think of any institutions where they aren't like that. Down to the school boards, It's really sad. So I promised I'd get to the positive shit. So let's do that. So a war's going on. And it just happened, it's really funny. We spent 2 years going through all kinds of mental issues, and everyone was affected by the pandemic. And then finally we're coming out of it, and oh, nope, a war starts, right? Another war where the media finds something else to frenzy about. And I realized that if they focused on wars, then they'd always be busy. But they really don't care about, to make it clear, they don't care about brown people. I mean, most of the time those things just aren't covered. It's the way that Western journalism works. European journalism covers that stuff more, but still not nearly enough. I think in the 80s, to go back to the point I was making of why it was fun, because we had inspiration, because we believed the future would be something amazing. There was still that idea that we could hit this space age, where not necessarily flying cars, but everyone's connected in a good way, and we have more time, and more family time, more time to do things. We have a better well-being, and everyone's taken care of, not because they're given everything by a communist or a socialist government, but because if the systems are played fair, everyone does fine. There's more than enough in the U.S. for every man, woman, and child. It's just a matter of properly distributing what we do have and not allowing these corporations to, say, buy up, stocks in their own company and do stock buybacks so they don't have to pay taxes. I mean, it's a well-known practice. It's a horrendous what goes on with the large corporations and how much, they can get away without paying taxes because they don't have any money that they made because they just invested it in something else back in the company. Keep doing it. Meanwhile, the average Joe ends up looking and having to pay some money back to the IRS, and he's looking at his wallet, trying to figure out how to do that. And at the same time, the United States is spoiled in that way. My point is that we can complain about the little things we have, issues with our military or issues with, the police. We have a lot of problems to work out. Our infrastructure is falling apart, and really, my thing is I still have hope because I know the people care, and the people get to business. We can take care of our own shit. If they're not cleaning up the garbage, start doing it yourself. My wife started a litter cleanup group. It ended up having like 50 people, and they'd go out in groups during COVID and pick up garbage on the freeway because nobody was doing it because they were scared to put people in a van and do it together. It was just, we're living in ridiculous times, and I think especially the pandemic really opened a lot of people's eyes, not just to corporate corruption, but to governmental incompetence within healthcare industry, within, our doctors don't know everything because there's always been this kind of hubris and attitude within the medical industry and the NIH and all these other agencies that they always believe that, people are just going to listen and just go, okay. And we will as long as all the science is there. But that's the last thing I wanted to talk about here, about how science has changed. People who want to go into those fields, just like going to college for anything these days, seems ridiculous because the high cost of college and paying for your tuition, but on top of that, the jobs are changing so fast, nobody knows what the hell to do. So we need to create our own lives, and we need to find out what moves us, what kind of passions we have, what we can do with those passions. And as I said, that's why building guitars for me, and trying to do other things too, maybe do cutting boards, and I just like building stuff. And it's been a while because I kind of lost hope. I lost faith, but I was also trying other things, And we should really, really be grateful for what we have. And that was, the point I was making about the U.S. when we complain about our first world problems. Right now, there are literally people being shot at and shelled. How much do you worry about that or care? That's up to you. I know it bothers me a lot when I see video footage of people, holding their parents or their children and crying as they die from a bullet wound for no reason because they were, walking down the street of their own town. A lot of horrendous things happen daily, but if we focus on them too much, just like focusing on COVID, and I guess that would be a perfect example. During the entire pandemic, I don't know a single person who died or was even severely ill. I think we had one family member's friend or something who ended up going to the hospital because she had pneumonia or something, but she had a lot of other health issues as well. So, kind of at the end, my point was that not that it wasn't dangerous, because a lot of people did, but in the end, all the precautions and fears and all the crap the media spewed, when you really look at the details of your own personal life, that's the best way to gauge it after 2 years and say, well, gosh, why did I ever worry? As long as you're just being careful, taking precautions. But we can't help it because the media scares the shit out of people. And look, I know people will say, well, I don't watch the news. Hey, I don't either. I haven't watched the news in like 10 years. Cable news? We don't even have cable. I hate all of the mainstream outlets, CNN, NBC, ABC, Fox, you name it, they all suck to me. But that doesn't mean that alternative media is any better. The truth is, a lot of it, most of it that I've heard, is them taking the mainstream news story and then putting their own spin on it or giving their example of what the truth is. No real reporting or journalism. There's some great ones out there, don't get me wrong, but it's very hard for people to get accurate information. Very difficult without assessing all the different angles. I think one of the ways that we could lead a better life for all of us is to what I would call, I guess, the driving impatience thing. You know how there's always that one guy who's driving too fast? And you're like, why? What is that guy getting to? What's his hurry? Maybe he's going to the hospital. Who knows, right? You don't know the situation and circumstances of them and why they're driving fast. But think about the guy who's driving too slow. Maybe he just maybe something's wrong with his car and you get frustrated with him. He doesn't even realize. Maybe his speedometer's off. We don't know the situation, but the point is, it's a great example of how somebody's either not good enough or, one way or another, either too fast or too slow. We all complain because we want things our way. And it's important to remember other people lead other lives. Each individual is just as valuable as the next. I don't give a shit if it's a person laying on the side of the street under a blanket with no home, or a guy standing in office as a president, or as any official, or a decorated soldier is to me no more. A decorated, say, soldier is no more important to me than a carpenter, an established carpenter, or a, journeyman plumber. You've seen battle, and that is commendable, but what I'm saying is people on the rudimentary, fundamental level, we're all equal. It's all about our attitudes and our morals and values. Because a person may think a police officer, for example, is the good guy, and the criminal he's arresting, who may have been a drug dealer, let's say, is the bad guy. That's that kind of assumption, right? Maybe the cop is corrupt and he's the one that planted the drugs. Or maybe the bad guy just, had some LSD and it was his first time trying it and he wanted to change his life and he ended up going to prison instead. Things are never always easy to navigate. They're very complicated. And to magnify this to an entire nation, what's going on over there, say with Russia, I believe they've arrested over 2,500 protesters from what I saw. I've seen there are people marching down the street against the war because of this war, the West and Europe have put sanctions on Russia, thereby cutting off a lot of their assets. Today, Visa and MasterCard, stopped doing business over there. And they've also blocked them from the SWIFT currency program around the world. These are huge kick in the balls. These are worse than dropping bombs on Putin himself. I mean, these are serious, agitating moves, but It's all that people can do. And so my final question here before I finish up this podcast is, and the one I would really like to answer is, how much should we care, not just as individuals, but as a nation? Should the United States get involved in this? Why should we put our own people at risk to save a nation like Ukraine? And I'm not saying yes, we should or we shouldn't. I don't know. Part of me wants to say, let's just go bomb the shit out of that runway of, 40 kilometers of vehicles sitting there waiting to get into Kiev. Bomb them, but I know that would be an instigation. That would be a move that if we got involved and Europe got involved, Putin has more than enough weapons to annihilate the entire planet. And this guy, whether you think he's stable or not, he has a lot of power and nothing to lose. And he's backed into a corner because he has no friends except perhaps China and North Korea. Now look, this is important because when you feel backed into a corner, when you feel like you're the only one who feels the way you do, it makes you act irrationally. And this can be shrunk down to any individual, no matter what they do in their life. The more support you have from family, friends, loved ones, and I don't know his personal life or situation, but the more that you're, liked and the more you're appreciated, often the happier you'll be. But that can also go to people's heads, and they can become quite arrogant and believe that every decision they make is God's decision. The divine rule has always been a way for the people we put in charge to determine themselves to be the leaders of the world, even though they were chosen by the people. So I guess in a way, maybe you were chosen by God, right? If you're chosen and voted in. But it wasn't always that way. This is why kings would pass it on to their kids. Even then, I started seeing things differently years ago when I started thinking, well, why did they just allow kings to just let the princes take over? And then you start realizing, well, the prince, it's just like living with the carpenter. You learn your trade. As long as he was a good king, hopefully he's taught his son to be a good king. Anybody else jumps into that position, he's just some goofball on the throne, doesn't know what the hell to do. There is a certain system. We as humans have created some elaborate systems. We have done amazing things. We have networks of satellites that right now, Elon Musk was, I guess, asked. I'm not a big fan of him, but I like what he did with the satellites. He was asked because Russia was taking out some of their internet connections, so they said, can they get some of the satellite, Starlink? And so they rerouted a bunch of them over there, and then they shipped over a huge crate, I guess, of these receivers that you have to have. I was just like, shit like that is awesome. Helping people out in a time of need is what's important. But that also brought up this question of, okay, if you bring people satellite dishes and communications equipment, it's different than bringing them guns or missiles, but even more different than bringing in aircraft and, tanks. It's a very complicated area to navigate. But the bigger picture here is that war is bullshit. Why the fuck are we even over there at all? Or should say, why the fuck are they over there at all? What does Putin expect to gain from this? I didn't know a lot about Ukraine before this, and I suspect a lot of other people didn't either. It's important to realize that Ukraine, from what I understand, was a country when Moscow was still a village. It's not like Ukraine was part of Russia and then branched off. Ukraine was Ukraine. Russia was Russia, and, they're very old, 1,000 years old, I believe. I mean, Russia's a very old place. And I think like 700-800 years maybe for the other one. But anyhow, people have a right to their own sovereign land. The citizens of that land are the owners of that land by default. This is important to think. When you set aside all the other bullshit about which government annexed which area or which army beat another army, it's just like, which bully beat up which kid to take his lunch money, right? Or what corporation came in and took over somebody's land because they knew that there were valuable minerals on there, or exploited someone. Because exploitation just seems to be second nature for a lot of people. And those people will squeeze you for every dollar you have. And that's what they're doing with the military right now. They're squeezing every penny they can out of war by trying to manufacture as many weapons as they can, because if you stop the war machine, you stop that profit. And people may not think it's really that simple. But the thing is, for the West, it might not be that simple. But for over in Russia, I don't know what his motivation is. Because keeping a war machine going means you just keep floating different bullshit wars around the world. But over there, I'm not sure what his motivation is. I have no clue. I don't know a lot about Russia. And, I remember somebody growing up thinking they're the bad guys, right? Like someone said the other day that they're the enemy, and I said, I don't believe they're the enemy. Because I don't believe Russia is an enemy, and I guess it all came down to context, and I should explain it clearer, that Russia is a place with people in it. Russia, as a place, the people seem, they're not the ones that are causing the problems. It's always the leadership. I've never known anyone in the U.S., anyone I've met in my life, to start wars from the U.S. either. We don't start wars. We just participate in them or get sent off to them, hoping and getting cheered on as these heroes of war and these sons and daughters of battle. And it's all bullshit, because all the wars that we've fought in the U.S. over the past several decades have been complete nonsense. The more you read about them and the more you learn about, well, there must be some reason, well, it always comes down. It always comes down to making money and taking over resources. But at any rate, I guess I'll leave it at there. This has been a longer podcast than I intended. And I just want to say, we still have to find some time in our lives to do what we want to do and to fulfill our passions, to meet people and love, go to the park, hang out. Summer's coming. We're going to have a good time. I think if we want to have a happier future, for the average citizen, we can't do anything about war. We can't stop what's going on over there. You can stand in the streets and protest. I've never really understood that. I mean, yeah, it's good to support, but you're not going to change Putin's mind by protesting in the U.S. At any rate, I'm glad that people care, though. And I'd like to see just people, the soldiers themselves, wake up to the fact that they're pawns. But it's hard. I want to have hope. Sometimes it's easy to lose it. At any rate, I appreciate y'all for coming along. Thanks to my peeps. As I said, if you want to join on Patreon, feel free to sign up. I'm going to do another podcast here pretty soon, but for now I'll close with this one and just say, my heart goes out to anyone in the world who's suffering right now, for any reason, because it's a hard life sometimes, but we're tough, we're resilient, we're strong people, we can make it through anything. So go listen to some 80s music and turn off the TV and have some gratitude for everything you have. I'll leave you with this cheesy 20-second song that I found when I was flipping through some songs on my old 8-track earlier. And have a great night, everyone. 15 minutes. All right, that's it. Have a good night, my friends. I appreciate you all, and try to have mutual respect for each other. That's all I can say. Respect for each other's opinions, respect for each other's ideals, and that goes for you, Russia. I should say Russian government, and the U.S., and many other Western nations. I don't want to get into the conspiracy aspects and the fact that everybody's crooked and there's a lot of money to be made, but hey, that's the world we live in. So, at any rate, talk to y'all next time. Be well. Take care of each other and yourselves. Peace.